Welcome to episode 21 of Feeling Through Live. I'm joined here today by Zaakirah, and we've got a whole lot we're going to talk about today, really. But Zaakirah, before we kind of hop into things, can you just say a quick hello and let us know where you're tuning in from?
Hi, yeah, so my name is Zaakirah or Z, and I live in the Chattanooga, Tennessee area at the moment, and it's a beautiful day here near the mountains.
Excellent. Well, I'm coming from Los Angeles where it's about to be triple digits for the next few days, so I'm jealous of what sounds like your nice mountain weather right now. But so Zaakirah, again, you are so many things in an awesome way. You're a photographer, you're an author, you're a podcaster, you are a brand strategist, and you're a cancer survivor, which are clearly you've obviously in your young life lived many lives and done many things. But I'd love to just kind of like start at the beginning. So, obviously we've got a pretty interesting title for this episode, which, obviously I know you've shared this story before, and it's something that just kind of like, it's so interesting. I never knew anything about this before talking to you. And again, that title for today is Photography Saved My Life, literally, again, there's no exaggeration here. So can you kind of like, start off by walking us through why today's title is called that?
Well, I guess I definitely want to start off with thanking my mother because it was my mother's intuition, my mother's visceral feeling that allowed me to still be able to be here today. It was a photograph that she took of me when I was 3 to 6 months old. Typically, most moms, they photograph their newborn babies, but instead of seeing a red glow for a red eye, instead, she saw something white in my eyes. So she first saw it in natural light, and then she saw it again when she took a photo and printed the photo of me. This is the day of having to print the photo at a convenience store. So then when she saw it, she took it to more than one coworker, more than one doctor to really ask, have you ever seen this before? Is this normal? And then it took I think I had a 6 month follow up, newborn follow up, and that pediatrician said, "Oh, there's nothing wrong. You're just worrying. You're just a new mom worrying." And my mom was not a new mom. I have an older sibling, and so then she got a referral to a specialist who then was able to pick up on the fact that this is retinoblastoma, the cancer of the eye, and if it is not detected or the surgery is not done now, it could lead to death. And so basically, 3 months later, it was all a whirlwind of connecting to another specialist who performed the surgery to remove the right eye. So I am actually only seeing you in one eye at this moment because it is a prosthetic eye. And through later on, I was introduced to a camera at age 5. So my mom just gave me a camera, and just ironically, you know how you give some children something and they take it and run with it, and you don't have to teach them anything else. It was almost like that with me for a camera at the age of 5. So it's really full circle now that I got my first DSLR camera, digital single lens reflex camera, when I was in middle school, well, high school, and then middle school, and then later on in college. So I then was able to study photography, and I just love being able to capture the essence of humanity.
Thank you for sharing all that, and I definitely want to walk back through that a little bit more bit by bit because again, you're 6 months old, and your mother takes a photograph of you, like, you know, many mothers would do of their newborn child, of like, wanting to like photograph their development. And in that photo, your mom sees in your eyes, rather than there being a red dot, which we've all seen with flash plenty of times, there was a white dot, right? And so what I find so interesting about this is because if I saw a white dot in someone's eyes in a photo, I would just think, oh, like the camera did a weird thing. I wouldn't even think twice about it. But in this case, your mom did think twice about it. Do you know like what Was she familiar with that being a warning sign beforehand? Do you know what prompted her to kind of like look into that more?
Well, one, I would say that one, this was before technology, before we had cell phone, before we had Photoshop, right? So something like that showing up was not normal at all. But second, it was also because before she took a photograph, she saw it in sunlight. So say, I was playing or something, and the sun hit my pupils, and so she saw it then first, and then she was like, "Wait a minute." But then again, when it showed up after she just, casually took a picture of me, and after she saw the printed photo, it was like hearing a reinforcement of, okay, this is not right. So I think first it happened with just seeing it in natural sunlight, just looking at my eye first, and then it when she was able to reiterate and say, okay, I have to do something about this.
Well, look, first off, I gotta hand it to your mom for being that perceptive. I mean, I know like, particularly mothers are gonna be particularly perceptive to their young children, but like that's kudos to her for being very perceptive there. I imagine that's something that could very easily go undetected by a lot of people. So she sees it first in the sunlight, then she sees it in this photo, and then from there, did she go? Do you know if she went like straight to a doctor, or like what was the next steps from there of her kind of like trying to figure out what was happening?
Yeah, so until it was time for my, I have to believe I had an every 3 month newborn checkup. So until it was time for that, she was asking friends and family and coworkers and my dad of, have you ever seen this before? Doing her own research. She loves libraries, loves researching, so doing her own research. And then by the time it was basically confirmed, when we went to the pediatrician that initially said there's nothing wrong, and then when she got the referral to go to a specialist, to then get the confirmation that yes, this is actually early stages of retinoblastoma, eye cancer. That's when it just really, I feel like that's emotionally, that's when it started to kick in for her of like, okay, I'm about to have a baby with not just two beautiful eyes, but now she's gonna have one eye. We have to go through surgery, and now it's like almost giving birth to her all over again, because now she has to relearn how to walk and talk, and just navigate through unspoken traumas too. So
Well, again, like good moral of the story here to like if you have a gut feeling something's going on, to not stop at the first kind of diagnoses there, saying that, oh yeah, everything's fine. Obviously, she felt like there was something that needed to be looked into. So good on her again for following through on that. So again, she gets this diagnosis. So this was obviously quite a while ago. You were a baby at the time. At the time of this diagnosis, how serious is a cancer like that? Like how dangerous is that type of cancer? I mean, it's pretty rare. Is that correct?
yes, it is a rare childhood eye cancer.
And because I'd never heard of it, so I imagine there's a lot of people who maybe don't know about it. What, like at that point where you're diagnosed a number of years ago, how serious of a cancer is that?
Yeah, the survival rate was not high at all back then. The typical age of survival rate is 5 years old. So most children did not make it um, beyond 5 years old. So back then it was rare. Now it is harder. Well, it's easier in a way to detect it early on because of technology. So now the survival rate is 95%, which is
Good.
great for
Okay.
technology.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
back then it was very rare, and it was difficult to also for my mom to find that community of anybody else does anybody else have this, or does anybody else know about this. So it definitely took a little while of continuing to research. She researched community to find a couple of other moms who had been through it, and one of them was Joey Bergsma, the
Hmm.
grandmother of Joey Bergsma, and who had started a foundation. um, yeah, you started right. Who started a foundation to make sure it's important that pediatricians actually make it a requirement to check the eyes, because most pediatricians at that time were not even doing that, just
Mm,
to scan the eyes. So she fought through the legislature to make sure that that law is passed, that pediatricians check the eyes.
I see. So so at the time, again, you got diagnosed. It's not a good survival rate. I mean, fortunately, that's changed with technology, as you said. But at the time, it's quite low. Was your mom when the diagnosis came in? Was your mom at that time aware of how severe of a diagnosis that was?
Because of the doctor expressed that. I also give kudos to my doctor for telling it like it is. We went from a doctor that said, "Oh, nothing's wrong," to the complete opposite of telling it like it is. So the doctor said all of this, and I think that's what was so interesting. Of he put it all out there and then gave my mom and dad some time to reflect on it before the surgery. But she was informed, and also kudos to medical libraries as well to kind of understand it in layman terms,
Mm-hmm.
because sure, you hear the name of the cancer and you hear the survival rate and you hear the side effects, but how do you really process that in a way that could easily be understood?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So again, I would imagine that having found it so early probably helped your chances here. And to what I understand is that the removal of your eye was to keep it from spreading to other parts of your
Yes.
body. So I guess in that sense, being able to detect it and follow through so early probably helped your chances of it not spreading and becoming a more serious cancer.
Yes, so first is the surgery of removing the eye. Now, there is technology has improved where you don't necessarily remove the eye; you can just remove the tumor. But for me, the eye had to be removed, and also I had a period of, I guess, incubation to have radiation treatment on the eye to also try to help to reduce the chances of it coming back. So as a result, even though the surgery was successful and I was dubbed a miracle baby, because also even surgery is risky as well. So aside from that, I have regular checkups. If not, when I was a young girl, it was every 6 months. As I got older, it became annually. So I have regular checkups to make sure that it has not grown or spread to the other eye or spread to other parts, but also it is possible because of the side effects of the radiation that the cancer can spread to other parts of the body, such
Mm.
as having secondary cancers.
And again, like you were saying, it was the radiation that caused the hearing loss. And that was
Yes.
entirely from the radiation. There was nothing like hereditary about that element of it.
No, not hereditary. It was definitely from the radiation. It definitely caused a mild hearing loss that it's still declining to this day, but thank goodness also for technology and hearing aids.
I'm curious, like, have you ever talked? So obviously, like, just I'm just thinking from a mother's perspective here, and then I want to touch on the miracle baby part of that too. I'll get to that in a moment, but have you ever had a conversation with your mom about like what it was like to like as with such a young child to first find out about this cancer diagnosis and then kind of go through the roller coaster that is the cancer diagnoses, and then through the radiation learn about the hearing loss? And again, you're still a baby at this time, I imagine, when the hearing loss comes in. Have you ever had a conversation with your mom about what that experience is like, of kind of like going from like at one moment, having like a, you know, kind of no warning signs of anything, to another of like having gone through, a significant surgery that around cancer and then hearing loss as a result of radiation, what her kind of experience was at that time?
Well, according to my mother, the first time I ever asked about it, I was about between 5 to 7 years old because of the experiences of school. By the time I get to school is when I was really introduced to the fact that I am a girl who is blind in one eye. I am a girl who looks like that she has a lazy eye. People ask me what's wrong with my eyes. So I did not see anything wrong with it because my mom did not raise me to see myself in that way. So first, she said I did actually ask her, was I born this way? So that was the first initial conversation where she then showed me the photograph that helped to detect the cancer, the one where she first saw the white glow in the eye. And second, we actually wrote a book about it. So she actually talked about her perspective. So she wrote about it. We even have an audiobook about it. It's called Seeing Life Through a Different Lens, a survivor's memoir on overcoming adversity with resilience. And she literally talked all about it. We are going in chronological order in the book, and it starts from literally the womb up to age 5, because once again, the survival rate was um, up to age 5. Most children did not survive past age 5. So we talked about that. So she literally had that first part of the book that we talk about that from the parental perspective. If the
Mm.
moms who are listening or dads who are listening want to read how she really felt about all of it going on.
And we're definitely going to get to your book too at some point in more detail. But I see you have it behind you right there. If you want to maybe pull that
Yeah.
forward and show everyone.
So this is what it looks like if you want to check it out on Amazon. I also do have it on my own website, but I know Amazon is easy, especially since there is an audiobook available too. So seeing life through a different lens. Um, and yeah, my mom's favorite color is purple. I think that's why we chose that.
Love
And I love
it.
the designer chose like a cloud based off of reading. It was actually a sunny day in this photograph, but they made it cloudy because of the theme of the
Sure.
yeah.
Artistic choice. So, again, and I find this such an amazing story because not just of, obviously fighting in really low odds at the very start of your life, and obviously the kind of really miraculous way in which your cancer was detected in the first place, but also because not only was it quite literally again a camera that saved your life as a baby, but you have become a professional photographer yourself. You obviously have a very, very unique relationship to cameras and photography. But can you I know you were starting to go through the bullet points of that, but can you walk us through a little bit of how you came into photography?
Yes. So after receiving my first camera, which was a Kodak Polaroid camera, that was age 5. And so my mom and dad loved to take summer road trips. So that was my first time really taking pictures of everything. And then my next camera that I was introduced to were the cameras that you take to the convenience store. You take a photograph, you don't know if it's a good photograph or not until it's developed. But it's just ironically, I have this one memory that's showing up at the top of my head right now. My mom is from New York, and sometimes she would take me back to where she grew up. And so one day we went on just a little tour of her favorite side of town, and there was actually a favorite TV show that I love to watch, and she was like, "Oh, this is where it was filmed," and we were moving very, very fast, and I wanted a photograph of it. So all I did was bring the camera and took a picture. And so she was like, "How do you know you even got it?" I'm like, "I just know I did." And ironically, when it came out a week later, it was a very good photograph. But that was my second camera. And then my third camera in middle school is when I got the opportunity to go out of the country to my first ever um, out of country trip. It was a study abroad program for 1 week. And I got to be with other deaf students, or they were hard of hearing, or they were sign language enthusiasts. So that was my first time also being around others and utilize the sign language that I did learn. And that's when I got another camera that actually had video capability. And so at the end of that trip, everyone who did not know sign language mastered how to sign their name. So that was fun. And then after that is when I also learned about um, uh, film and darkroom photography. So high school, we had one course about that before moving on to the digital camera that you see out there today. So that was really where I ended up realizing that I could literally make a difference with this camera. My voice can be with this camera. So even though it had been full circle all of my life, it wasn't until high school that I realized that I could actually make a living off of this.
And I'm wondering, there are a lot of artists that we learn about, or like painters per se, that sometimes it might be. God, my brother's gonna kill me because he's like an art historian guy and an artist himself. So the fact that I'm not recalling this very famous painter in my mind, I know he's gonna be mad at me. But there's like one famous painter that I should know that like his style, later on historians say, was very much informed by I don't know if he was nearsighted, farsighted, or something with his eyesight that very much created his style, which ended up being his signature. Do you ever find that as a photographer, obviously coming at it from a unique perspective, having one eye, that in any way it comes through in your photography, whether it be like from an artistic standpoint or a technical standpoint? Is it, do you find ways in which that kind of informs your approach as a photographer?
Yes, actually. The first thing that came to my mind when I was living in Washington, D.C. to study professional photography, I was with a family friend who was also a photographer. One day we just went out and about and did street photography. And we took a few photos before lunch break. And during lunch break, I showed him some of my photos. And he made this comment that has stuck with me for years of saying, you actually by default have the photographer's eye, because if you think about it, before smartphone photography, the way to see your photograph is to look in the viewfinder, and the viewfinder requires you looking in with one eye only. So most people are squinting to see the photograph, but me, I don't have to. I see it with one eye. So I think that kind of did attribute to I'm always seeing a photograph anyway. After school, my eyes were trained in that way, but by default, I have the photographer's eye.
I love that. You know, it's so funny. I mean, even as someone myself was a filmmaker and certainly stared through the barrel of a lens plenty of times, I never would have thought of it in that way. That's so interesting that, like, again, you know, we're often closing one eye to kind of see what a picture will look like to get that dimension that like will more be simulate a camera lens, but that's how you see the world, like really quite literally as a photographer, as a photographic lens. That's so interesting. I like really genuinely like, I mean, now that you say it, it's quite obvious in a lot of ways, but I never would have thought about that without you kind of like laying that out. That's really, really interesting. Um, you know, so I'm really curious, like you you mentioned before when you were talking about your story that it was hard to find people that had your experience that was like really similar to your experience. And like, you know, obviously, just to kind of relate that to the deafblind community, something certainly that I've learned a lot of which through this platform of Feeling Through Live, talking to a lot of different people in the community, that obviously the deafblind community has quite a variance to it in a spectrum, you know, of manifestations of it, and you know, oftentimes I've heard that echoed that there certain manifestations of it, people feel like they can't really find someone that's like that. There's kind of living their specific experience. Can you talk a little bit more about, you know, what it's like growing up, you know, on the one hand, feeling that no one else is quite having the same experience to you, or is that like a fair way to put it even? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
That is definitely a fair way to put it. For the longest time, I always felt like I was the only one. One, I am multi-dimensional anyway, as a woman, as an African American, as a cancer survivor, and throw in the religious factor of I practice the religion of Islam. So for the longest, I've always been the only one, and technically, I still am the only one. But I do also want to rewind and you mentioned Emily, who was watching, and she actually not only connected us, but she also connected my mom to that community of other resources for me to have the ADA resources that I really needed in both my private schools, my technical schools, charter schools, and the whole bit. And so through Emily also is when I also got to meet other African American females who had the same exact cancer that I had. So may their soul rest in peace, but there are a couple that have already passed on. But it was so exciting to spend that time with them. Of wow, we have so much in common. Wow, I am not the only one. Wow, we went through the same exact thing. And wow, I my life has even more purpose now because I'm still standing, and I feel like also they're like my angels of I maybe continue living life fully because they did not get the opportunity to do so. So once I did meet other African American women and African American men who had the same cancer that I had, it was really exciting. But at the same time, I'm still the only one, considering also that I was blessed to still have vision. I still have vision in one eye. Most of them are already completely blind. Some of them are even completely deaf. And for me, I'm hearing. I can hear you. I can read your lips, and I can understand you. And as a result, it's kind of also attributed to not only the confidence, but also the having the accessibility of being able to still speak and write and podcast and the whole bit.
Yeah, and that's just from the opportunities that we've had to connect so far, and obviously learning more about you today as well. You seem like someone who is really resilient and really able to operate in kind of any setting, I imagine. But is there something particularly important about finding community that specifically has like a very similar shared experience to you? Does that add another dimension that you can't really quite get in other places?
Yes and no, because once again, we're all the same. If under all of the layers, we all are the same. But at the same time, it's like marrying, right? When you find your other half, it's literally more exciting and more relatable and more exhilarating. So I think that's also why it's important for me to find that sense of community for the moment where I do feel like I'm comparing myself to those who are not similar to me. I think about the fact that um, there are people who I can talk to, and they understand what I'm going through because we literally are going through the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm. So you know what? I'm gonna actually take a quick pause for an interpreter shift here. And okay, Alana, we're good to go. Great. So continuing here, um, and kind of related to this, but I want to touch on this before we move into like all the awesome stuff you're doing now. And actually, before I get into that, if you're watching, we got a good bit left to our really interesting conversation here. So if you're watching on Facebook, it really helps to share this episode. YouTube, feel free to send the link to people. We still got plenty left in this conversation, so that would be great. And if you have any questions throughout the rest of this, feel free to type them in the chat box or just continue to comment as you are is great as well. So continuing here, you to borrow your words here, but I think they're really apt ones. You are a miracle baby, and quite literally, excuse me, given the odds of what the cancer that you had was at that time. And it's obviously something that you've also described that your mom has really told it how it is when you've asked her questions as a young kid. How do you feel? And again, I'm using quotation marks around miracle child because there's a lot of layers to it. It's more than just that. But how do you feel being this miracle baby in a lot of ways that, again, really beat the odds just to be here? How do you feel like that's informed your life thus far?
I do want to rewind and actually say the first person who coined the term miracle baby was our doctor, the doctor who performed the surgery, and that one that I see annually. So he coined it first. But for me, I did not take it into full consideration or understand the full capacity of it until I started to speak on it in my own words. Instead of being bullied by the fact that I have one eye or a so-called lazy eye or four eye because I do wear protective glasses when I'm out and about. Instead, I started to take it into my own words of saying, I am a cancer survivor. I survived something very powerful, something more than you have imagined. So it wasn't really until I started to speak up for my own self and advocate for myself that I really started to believe the word miracle and survivor and um, just understand just how powerful or full of resilience I do have and how much I live a life on purpose. Because also, not only did I get that from my mom of just, hey, have fun, celebrate your birthday all the time, or do travel to the places you want to go to, do the things you want to do, because tomorrow is truly not promised, especially for my type of cancer. Because even though I am in remission now, I am in good health, anything can change at the very moment. So.
Is that something that, because you said you go in for somewhat regular checkups for that specifically, is that something that, you know, you think about a lot, or is it just so much part of your life that kind of you just go about it and it is what it is? Like what's your relationship to that at this point?
It's a little bit of both. I've actually had people even ask me, "How are you so laid back about all of this?" I'm like, "Well, I've been dealing with it for a very, very long time. Two, I am very self-aware, and three, whatever happens, happens. So yes, I do take the precautions of going to a doctor regularly, but then I also am confident in my purpose also to not. Uh, Try to let it dwell in me every single day. But it does get hard sometimes of, just wondering what if, or just wondering uh, when is the day will come, and what would happen if I do fully lose my hearing or fully lose my vision or anything else could happen.
Do you find any connection between, again, your miracle baby origins and your faith? Do those kind of intertwine in any way for you?
Yes, actually, very much so. My parents instilled in me at a very young age the power of prayer. That's actually something that my mom wrote about in the book. During while they were waiting for me to get out of surgery, the doctor literally led them to a prayer room where they could spend time in prayer, spend time in nature, and just also learn how to meditate and just understand that it is what it is. Like accept the things that you cannot change, but have the strength and the courage to speak up on the things that you can.
Yeah, well said. Well, you know, you've obviously seem like you don't take life for granted because you are invested in a lot of different things. So I want to kind of talk about all of the things you're doing. We started to talk about your book, so why don't we just go into that first? I mean, because again, you're an author, you're a podcaster, you're a brand strategist, you're a photographer. But again, to talk about the author side, how did that book? I mean, again, it's autobiographical, right? Telling your personal story. How did that book come about?
Well, technically, it was my mom's idea also first. She actually said that when I was younger, I asked her, "When are you going to write my story?" And so technically, she was doing that. She had a journal for 18 years of my life and just documented as often as possible the day in the life of Z. And then she did get the opportunity to start her own medical blog. So she did a blog from the medical perspective, which was great. She was doing much better than me because I started blogging about my travels. And then she got the opportunity to have that book published. So she got to send the manuscript off to a publisher. And then she sent it to me for my approval. But as I was reading it, I felt like something was missing. So I was like, I think there's some way we can tweak this and change it. And so she was like, have at it. It's your story. And so that's when it came about also. But then I realized, oh, I shouldn't have done that because now I have to like heal and talk about my story in a light that I am not used to. But it worked out that officially 2018, 2019 is when my mom and I both agreed to disagree and sat down on what we wanted to share in the book and how we wanted it to be not only just for all cancer survivors, whether you have retinoblastoma or RB, or you have a different kind of cancer. Because there are lots of other childhood cancers. September is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, so we wanted to kind of generalize the book to be more on the modern perspective, but also on the lines of the books like Diary of Anne Frank, Chicken Soup for the Soul, because I love those types of books growing up, and I wanted to know where those type of books were for me, specifically for cancer survivors. So that's where we kind of tweaked it a little bit to make it that kind of guide. And thankfully, the Amazon reviews so far have said, I'm not a cancer survivor, but I needed this book. So
Well, I love to hear that. So and you kind of made a little bit of mention about this before, but in the process of kind of looking back and writing about your experiences thus far, what, did you see things differently? Kind of looking back at them, and like what was that experience like for you, and what effect did it have to kind of like go back to the beginning of your life and really sit with these events in order to be able to relay them to other people. What was that like, that
Oh
experience?
yes, it was definitely hard, but also healing because I also had to realize that it was my therapy too. It was my way to heal in order for me to heal before I can fully help someone else. And so then with reflecting, I was able to realize that there's always been little bits and pieces that followed and stayed with me in a sense of always being optimistic, always being happy-go-lucky type of girl, and always being creative. So I've always loved to create, even though uh, I love music. Even though, of course, it's hard, to pick up on understanding lyrics. I also love to just create and write and just story tell. So I then was able to realize just how much everything really connected. That's what connected. So I love being able to realize that when I did reflect before the book was published, just realized how everything was literally a puzzle piece being connected. Also because I was the only child growing up. I'm not the only sibling, but I am the only child growing up. So I spent a lot of time by myself. So
So I'm gonna actually hold one more second for just another interpreter switch real quick here. And I think Alana was gonna maybe adjust her lighting. So let me. Great. Are we good? Oh, I can. Alana, you're good to go still? Oh, yeah, that's helpful. Great. Okay, I'm going to switch back 1 second here. And all set. Okay, great. Perfect. Got a little light, more light there. Perfect. So, did the book come before the podcasting, or did those kind of happen
actually,
simultaneously maybe?
kind of coincidentally, because it's a marketing strategy that I learned as well. If I knew that I'm going to get more people to understand my story, and also for me to be practice talking about my story, the podcast came first, and then the book came later. So the first season, if you listen back to episode 1 of the Living Legacy podcast, which right now the theme is woman of purpose sharing stories of resilience. So I talked to other creatives and business owners and women of faith. But the first season started out with solo episodes talking about my cancer, talking about my hearing loss, talking about my religious faith as well. I got to interview my dad, and later on, I got to interview my mom as well. So it started out as a marketing tactic to get more people to be more aware of the cancer, of who I am, aside from how they knew me as a photographer, as a brand strategist, however they knew me. So it was my way to be comfortable with telling my story before the book came out. So that also helped to be able to be more confident in speaking up about it.
Well, about that podcast, I was telling you right before we got started, I've had the privilege to listen to a bunch of episodes now. It's really great. Just before we talk about that, where can people find that if they're interested in checking it out?
Yes, the Living Legacy podcast is basically everywhere. It's on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher. So there are a few places that you can listen to without needing to log in, such as also tune in. Tune in is also an option too. So anywhere you just Google search Living Legacy podcast, and you'll be able to find it.
Awesome. And yeah, no, it's really great. It's really, I mean, you obviously really know what you're doing, not just as a host, but like technically it's great, really well put together. I imagine maybe you've been fighting some urges today not to take over as host here while being on the other side of the coin getting interviewed. But yeah, again, you were talking about the focus now, particularly, and obviously, not obviously, but obvious to me because I've listened to it. You've also shared a lot of your personal journey through that platform as well. But a lot of your focus as of late has been focusing on women of resilience and purpose. And I'm wondering, what kind of moved you to really want to make it a platform specifically for that at this point?
That's actually a good question. I'm trying to remember how it started. I've always been a people person. I've always valued connection and valued relationships in that way. So it started off with just finding ways to include the people that I know and love on the podcast. And people really love that. Like, I think my first couple of guests were, well, of course, my dad. And then my first guest on episode 3, when I got to travel to Ghana, West Africa, she is a mutual friend of my dad. And so we met and she became my auntie in Washington, D.C. while I was living up there, new to student living in the whole bit. So I also got to interview her. So my first few um, guests were people who I know and love. And so then it just kind of became a theme as I continued my seasons, as I continued to join more Facebook groups and connect with other amazing women who were just as creative as I was. And that kind of kept the podcast going as well. I would have those types of guests. And just like any other your favorite talk show, people love to see those interactions. So I think that's how it ended up continuing, of just including the people that we I know and love, that know me, and then we got to converse and have it kind of have a recorder with us, because we have so many amazing conversations behind closed doors.
Right.
So it's like have a recorder and publicly display and show, affection in that way.
Yeah, it was kind of like knowing a lot of great, interesting people, having great conversations, and going like, "Hey, we should really record this. I feel like a lot of other people would appreciate this." It sounds like there's an
Exactly.
element of that. Um, and this is kind of connected to the theme of the women that you feature on your podcast. But I'm also wondering, you had mentioned earlier in this episode your intersectionality as a woman who is of the disability community, who's African American, who's of Islamic faith, and as a woman. Obviously a lot of what's happening right now very much exemplified through Black Lives Matter, but obviously certain offshoots of that have been growing, as far as Black Disabled Lives Matter or hashtag Disabled Lives Matter, various variations of that. I think in certain ways you really uniquely kind of fall into a lot of those categories of those communities that are really starting to get more focused. And get louder voices that have been kind of historically underrepresented and not have had some of the platforms that are growing right now. What's your relationship to that been particularly over the last several months?
So I think there's this phrase. It was a meme that showed up on the web, and it talked about millennials in general, because I am a millennial, and it just showed this meme of how millennials are basically numb to it all, because it is so much and it's happening so often. But it doesn't mean that we don't feel it or don't relate to it. And so for me, as a deafblind woman, I feel even more so for those who are deaf and they do get pulled over by the police, and the police are ignorant in the sense of if they don't know that someone is hard of hearing. So if they don't know the sign language, they would assume that it's a gang sign, or if someone is not responding because they don't understand what they're saying or they don't speak, that they think that they're trying to disobey. So moments like that connect more to me, because just a matter of having that understanding, that awareness of okay, this person is just different, not trying to break any rules in that way. So also, I think the options out there that you can have a card with you in your wallet when you take your wallet out to say, "I'm deaf and hard of hearing. Please understand, I'm not ignoring you." Or also, in my case, I can speak up and say, if they don't already see my hearing aids, when I turn to, get my ID and things of that sort, I say, "Sorry, I am hard of hearing. I may have a hard time understanding you," things of that sort. So just being able to speak up, I think that's the most important thing as well. And just also being able to be advocates for those who cannot speak up for themselves is very close to my heart in that sense.
You make me think of a friend of mine who's a young Black man wanted to celebrate his birthday recently by doing a road trip, driving across the country to see a lot of people that he knew in different places. And all the Black women in his life talked him out of doing that, saying it was just too dangerous. He's hard of hearing as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they just all said, like, you're just kind of playing with fire there. And it's, to speak to what you're saying, it's kind of that double layered danger if you're a person of color who's also hard of hearing in a situation like that, is an unfortunate reality, but a reality nonetheless to be very aware of, as you're putting, is to know how that really endangers you in a situation and how to do your best to counteract that. And I think that's something that, certainly for me and a lot of people out there, it's been recently a very, very eye-opening experience to learn about how the prevalence of that for people like myself who don't have that experience and don't deal with that on a moment-to-moment basis. And for me, it was just something in dialoguing with him about that really impactful, that it's such a juxtaposition between such an innocent desire to want to celebrate a birthday by having a road trip and going and driving and seeing a lot of people, and not feeling like it's safe to do something so simple like that has certainly really resonated with me, because again, that's something that I personally would have the privilege to not have to think twice about. That just came up.
Yeah, and I think for me, what advice I would give to those who are in that situation is to not necessarily let it stop you, but yes, still be very aware. But I think for me also, it was interesting because for me, my first few out of country trips, I never wanted to be alone for that exact reason. One of interacting with people who don't understand, and if I don't understand them, then they think I'm ignoring them, and then knowing how that goes. But my suggestion is to not let it stop you. Utilize the resources from ADA, American Cancer Society, that tell you how to really interact with and have what tools to kind of keep with you. And also, not to really fully travel alone, because I never really did solo trips. My only so-called solo trip was to South Africa. That was actually the last place I've been to before all of this went down.
That's a good last place to go to.
So it was fun too, and safe. I felt safe. Not only also because it's already an English-speaking country, so that too. But I never was fully alone, because now there was the power of Facebook group where I can meet up with people or say, hey, is anybody going to be in this side of town today? I want to eat. I don't have to fully be alone. So for me, that was always, the trend that stayed in my mind, no matter where I travel to. I heavily trust the buddy system. So it was different because some may see it as being codependent in that way, but at the same time, I am independent, very much independent. So as long as, I can have, like even when I drive today in the US, I'll have my location on. If I was in an Uber, I will send my location to someone. And then also, thank goodness for Uber, I was driving with them for a little while. And that was fun because, I love driving. My dad loved driving, so I got it from him. But there's actually a feature on there where I could say I am hard of hearing. So it was fun because most riders did not understand how hard of hearing I was, because by the time they get in the car and they hear me say hi to them, they're like, oh, I thought they said you were deaf. I'm like, deaf or hard of hearing, so I'm the latter. So that was a good experience of being able to have that feature of I am hard of hearing. So at least that gives people the understanding of saying, are you hearing, or do I need to sign, or, especially if in the case I do eventually lose my vision, do you need Braille? When I do get to speak and tell my story, things of that sort. So it's just been great with technology in this time and age to have those features available.
Yeah, and I noticed that a couple times when I got into Ubers that I'd get that message, and it's really great that they do that. But just to kind of touch on, the point you were just saying about you'd get in and you'd hear someone and then they'd say, oh, I thought you were deaf, and like not really understanding, again, the different manifestations of that. And again, I'm sure that's something that you encounter in a dual way as someone who's hard of hearing and also, sees through one eye. How often, what's it like encountering new people and kind of, continually kind of like, I imagine there's a lot of people who don't really understand that, like, kind of think of it as a binary thing. It's either you see or you're blind, either you hear or you're deaf. And obviously you're certainly on the spectrum in both of those categories. Is that something that you find that you have to kind of keep continually explaining to people? And if so, like, do you have a real good spiel down at this point, or can it be frustrating sometimes? What's that experience like?
It's still a challenge, especially in the online world, because if you put the word deafblind, they think, how are you able to see what you're typing, or how are you able to hear, what the person is saying? So I do have to explain it in the sense of I can still see you and I can still hear you. And even when it was time for me to work, I do occasionally work part-time jobs. So when I was working, of course, my HR managers know, my managers know, but when I interact with coworkers, I have to tell them, because most of the time people love to talk soft, especially if they want to gossip, they want to talk, and not look at you. They want to talk while you're backing to them. So I'm like, I have to tell them, I don't understand what you're saying. I wear hearing aids. I'm hearing impaired. I want to understand what you're saying. So I literally have to still advocate for myself in that way. But of course, it's not something easy. It's not something, I guess I wouldn't necessarily, it's not something that I brag about, but I have become more comfortable with speaking confidently on.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that's something that when you have to do it over and over again, it's something that you just have to kind of get used to, I would imagine. So with the time left, I'd love to like touch on the brand strategist side of yourself, and I know that's something that has been a growing part of your life. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work in that space?
Yes, so officially in 2018, I started a creative marketing agency called Focus Media Group, Focus with a PH. And I started it because I wanted it to be more inclusive for other creatives and photographers to have the opportunity that I've had to photograph events and travels and celebrities. But then I realized as I started learning more about Facebook and Instagram, I realized that there are other small businesses who need to understand how to use it for their own business. And that's when I was able to also take what I love of being creative, just not only photographing, but loving things that are colorful, and put all of that into one. So of course I take my podcasting skills and use that because I learned how to do videography for a little bit, so I can help people with that. And then for those who want to launch their own podcast, I can teach you that or write about it, have blogs about it. So the creative marketing agency was something full circle for me. So that's what I spend a lot of my time doing now, especially in 2020, of on the computer a lot, typing a lot. Thank goodness for Zoom also, where I can have video, read their lips, don't even have to mention hard of hearing if I don't have to, and just continue to work in that way. So that's fun and a great way to interact. And I think that's what it is full circle that I do as a brand strategist. So I love to always work with women also because there's the difficult thing about the pay wage gap between men and women. So I love to intentionally make sure I work with women when I have my team members and whatnot. And also, in a sense of sometimes my clientele, I love to work with women as well because I understand as moms, they are very busy. So that's what I do as a brand strategist and a business owner.
And again, it's like you said, as someone who has as very multi-talented as you are, it's a nice way to bring all those skill sets together and really use them all for one common goal. I understand too. I saw, because we follow each other on social media, I saw that you're also working in the A&R world as well. Can you
Yes,
tell me a little
so
bit about that?
that yeah, that's been an incredible opportunity. I guess going back to my first favorite songs were from soundtrack movies, and I was one of those kids that was always in front of the TV, glued. But not only also because I can hear it, but too because if I really love something, I would be glued to the TV. So I was always like that with music. Music was played when I was in the room with my mom, and music is played whenever we are on the road trip. And thank goodness I've had the opportunity to attend music festivals, which I feel I miss those because I feel those were the best opportunities for hard of hearing or deaf because you don't have to hear anybody talk, you just feel the music. You literally feel the music through your chest. So I personally love music, and ironically, because it's been such a huge part of my life, and while I'm blessed to still be able to hear music, I've been able to support other independent music artists to get their music out there. So ironically, it's fun that if a new artist releases an album and I listen to the album, this is before the days of Spotify. If I listen to the album, I could predict what their single would be before they even release it, and I'm 99% of the time right. So it was a blessing I'm able to do that for independent music artists now, of make sure that they have music that will get out there that people will really like. So for me, I'm love to choose the 90s type of music, all genres really, because I feel like that was the best era, at least for me. So if we can find artists that are that passionate about music as much as I am about photography, then I feel like I've done my job as an A&R or artist in repertoire, which is basically the one that scouts or finds music talent for. Well, I would have said labels in this way because they are intentionally independent, but more ways of exposure.
Well, Zaakirah, I'm really interested to see what other roles you add to your life here. We're adding up those slashes like on a daily basis here. But again, it's something that you're obviously someone who's very passionate about life, and that just comes out in a lot of different spaces. But yeah, it's been such a pleasure talking to you today, and we're gonna have to connect again at some point in the future. I'm sure there's plenty left to discuss, but thanks for sharing everything that you did today, and I certainly learned a whole lot from our conversation today, and I hope people watching got a lot out of it as well. Why don't you just one last time grab that book? Let's end with a little bit of. Why don't you just plug that one more time, and anything else you want to direct people to?
Yeah, so this book is Seeing Life Through a Different Lens. You can find it on Amazon. I also have a website. You can find my social media on my website. You can also find my other services on my website. And it's my first name and my middle name.com. So ZAAKIRHNAYYAR.com. So um, that's where you can find everything. And I love to read messages, especially when you love to what part you love about the book or what part you love about the podcast. Because I'm a creative, so these are all my babies. So I want to make sure that my babies are doing okay. So I love to receive those type of love notes. So that's great.
Love it. Well, thanks again for joining us today. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. A reminder that for those of you who want to check out the Feeling Through experience, we're doing another live stream of that on September 12th at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. It is free. Just go to feelingthrough.com/register to sign up for your free e-ticket. It's going to be awesome. We've got some great guests, panelists joining us for that installment of the Feeling Through experience. And if you know what that is and have seen it before, have been waiting to see it, come join us. If you're not sure what that is, go to feelingthrough.com where you can learn more about it. And we'll see you for Feeling Through Live next Friday, same time, same place. And until then, have a great weekend. Bye.